Aster here, and today I just wanted to give my quick 2 cents about the current lore state of Genshin Impact. And today, I just wanted a much more relaxed video rather than a scripted one because, I'll be honest with you, it's been a pretty rough week for me. If you've been on my Twitter, you would know how rough it's been. But nevertheless, I just wanted to talk about Genshin's lore state right now, and I think it's a pretty good lore state. I know that a lot of people have said their biggest criticism with Genshin is that it takes a lot of effort in order to get to the nitty-gritty of the lore. And honestly, I definitely agree. As someone that has consistently been reading the artifact lore in the past, have been hyper-focused on dialogue or the character lines or the character stories, I can tell you right now that Genshin lore before was really taxing. There was just so much in the Archon Quest back in Inazuma that was unexplained unless you go deeper into the lore. And the reason I'm saying that the current lore state is much better than the one before is because Genshin's Archon Quest in Sumeru has been improving. I genuinely think that the current atmosphere and the current writing style of Genshin Impact still has a lot of room for improvement, but at the same time, I don't want to focus on that and just admit that it's been great. Genshin Impact's Archon Quest, especially in Sumeru, has respected the criticisms that Inazuma had before. It took its time building the Fatui Harbingers that it needs, it took its time exploring the cutscenes, and it took its time exploring the world of Sumeru with its Archon Quests. I will admit that when I found out that the Archon Quest wasn't going to be just 3 acts, I was elated. Not only was that a lot of content for us to cover, but it means that Genshin was taking things slow. And it was taking things slow without wasting time. Now the thing is, I haven't been able to play the Archon Quest in 3.1 version because I've been really busy, but just from what I've got from 3.0 and the criticisms that I've heard for 3.1, Genshin hasn't been doing what it did before, where everything was just a really long drawn out fetch quest where the action happens in the end. I think that the Samsara cycle, for example, was a really good way of introducing the fact that everything was cyclical, but at the same time, it didn't really completely feel like a fetch quest that didn't serve its purpose. I think that each cycle felt different in a way, even though it was supposed to feel the same. I also like that Genshin is taking its time building things up while also respecting the player's time by not just making us fetch some random flower in the middle of goddamn nowhere. The plot is ramping up very nicely in my opinion. I also think that the cliffhanger for this patch was also pretty good, and not to mention that it's taking its time to explain what's happening. I also like the fact that Genshin Impact doesn't completely need you to read the supplementary material in order to understand it. This was a really big problem in the Inazuma Archon Quest, where in the Inazuma Archon Quest, there was a lot of missing NPCs, there were a lot of missing major players. For example, Kamisato Ayato only got his spotlight when he was revealed as a character. Not to mention, the Resistance story was completely hidden away in another world quest called Clean House, or that Kokomi and Kazuha and Goro didn't get the proper closure that they need during the Archon Quest. Instead, we just chalked it up for one really cool cutscene with Kazuha, and then the Resistance was basically eliminated. The thing about this one is that in Sumeru, we respect that the characters are important, we respect that the characters are actually doing something in the story, and we respect that they have a bigger tie to the overall run-in of what's going on in Sumeru. And yes, we do have some characters that are meant to be backline characters. For example, Milu wasn't really meant to be a really big player. People like Alhaitham and Sino were pretty much in the forefront for 3.1, and I really appreciate that. Now, we don't have a lot of Scaramouche lore or Ildotore lore right now because we are building that up for the future, but we do get to see the Elazar Hospital, which I think was a really nice atmosphere setting for the human experiments that they were doing. If you took your time to read those, which I really hope that you did, you will see just how horrifying the Fatui experiments were, and I really wish that you took your time in reading those because that was actually beautiful. Honestly, I do genuinely think that Genshin Impact is improving, just in terms of lore, and just the pacing that they have. I know that it's still a common thing to criticize the dialogue, which honestly I do understand. Genshin's dialogue does still seem to pander out longer than it should have. I think that the syntax that they use and the semantics, grammar, and vocabulary they have is really extensive, but I do think that they improved a lot, especially when it comes to banter dialogue. That was one of their weakest kind of dialogue because everyone would just talk and talk for paragraphs on and on. And I do think that Genshin's exposition has been using a lot of cutscenes really well. I think that while Scaramouche wasn't really shown in this patch, just the use of a cutscene through the memories was a really good way of establishing his presence and making us think about him. That was in contrast to Signora's just sudden death. I'm still really upset about that, by the way, but nevertheless, I'm glad to see that Genshin understood the importance of building up a character, especially someone that's hyped up to be a boss. I think it was a really good introduction into Scaramouche's story, especially for the people that did not read the Husk of Opulent Dreams or read the artifact lore. I think it was a really good call to give that entire backstory because Scaramouche's backstory is extensive and you can't trust everyone to read the lore. That's just not how people work. And if you think that just by saying that, oh, you should just read all the artifact lore, all the 50 bajillion artifact lore, that's not gonna happen. People usually just look for the Archon Quest and look to the Archon Quest because that's supposed to be the middleman and the most accessible form of lore. And I'm really happy that they covered everything that they need to cover in the Archon Quest because that just means that lore in the background for artifact lore, etc. is supplementary. Imagine if they didn't do the Scarlet King in the Archon Quest. Imagine the wasted potential that could have had. And people will have to read the Gilded Memories for everything? No! Genshin Impact is finally respecting the fact that not everyone is reading lore. And I think that's great. I think that the more accessible and the more front and center the lore is, or the story is, not the lore, in Genshin Impact, the more people will appreciate the lore. Even people that don't really read all the archives or all the Genshin Impact artifact sets, because it's time-consuming, and I'm genuinely happy that the Sumeru Archon Quest is respecting this, is respecting the thought and the possibility that not everyone reads the lore. I think that Genshin Impact Sumeru Archon Quest gives the context that it needs and gives the execution that it needs to fulfill the stakes and to respect the gravity of the situation, especially for a very political story like Sumeru. I'm genuinely so excited for what's about to come in 2 days, and I really hope that you guys are as well. I hope that you guys are excited just like me, and here's to Sumeru's 3.2. But yes, what are your thoughts on the current lore state of Genshin Impact? You are free to disagree with me. I can definitely see people that are criticizing the Sumeru Archon Quest for being too long, and if you think that's the case, then that's perfectly fine. Feel free to write down in the comments your opinion on everything, or just the lore state of Genshin Impact, and what would you want the Genshin Impact to do more. Anyway, my name is Aster, and this was just me turning on my mic and finally rambling on about something that I love, because this week has been very heavy for me. I'm actually pretty sick right now. My throat's kind of dying on me. So I'm just going to lay down in bed and hopefully finish up the 5 scripts that I really want to show you guys before the 3.2, because I really want to make that Scaramouche video before 3.2 drops. Anyway, my name is Aster, and thank you so much for chilling with me.